Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our summer series on remarkable responsa, questions and answers that change Judaism. And I'm a big fan of Sheilot Utshuvot, Shilos Utshuvos, responsa literature that really has a very long history. Many of the first halachic works that we have originated with the questions and answers that were asked of the Gaonim. Right, the Gaonic period coming right after the period where the Talmud was redacted and edited. So already starting in the 7th, 8th, 9th century, people would study the Talmud and they'd be confused. What do I do? Is there machlokas here? Who do I follow? They would ask questions of the Gaonim would respond. That literature evolved into, for example, Rabbi Isaac Alfasi's halachot, the Rif, we've quoted him before, and the Rambam, Maimonides' Yad HaChazakah, his code of Jewish laws, Mishneh Torah, and then the Shulchan Aruch, and then the Mishnah Berurah, and then the Aruch HaShulchan, and then the Art Scroll of every volume of Jewish practical guidance. But it started with responsa, and we're going to be focused not only on more contemporary responsa, although I must confess I had a little bit of a chuckle. Some of you, there was a shir in the shul on Shabbos by a college graduate talking about the idea of celebrating college graduation. So it was our graduation Shabbat. Are you there, Hirsch?
Yeah.
So when he was talking about some of the response, he talked about the Rabbi Menashe Klein, the Mishnah Halachos, and he talked about someone from the 1900s. Right, 1900s. Rabbi Klein lived in the second half of the 1900s. He was kind of contemporary, but here you have this college graduate calling him living in the 1900s. Definitely resonated with me as I hit middle age, with turning 50 this week. So it's
time and tide waits for no man.
Exactly. So here's a little kid saying, "The guy in the night, I'm someone from the 1900s." It's like, how does that? It's a little bit. Where does that make you? Anyway, even Al was born in the 1900s. So in any event. We're going to be looking at more contemporary responses, and for contemporary purposes, you'll see their names that you're familiar with that I quote very often in our other classes. People like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, in particular, on the American scene, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef on the Israeli scene, and some others. So we're going to start this. We're going to be looking at different topics. Upcoming topics will include electricity in the laws of Shabbat. We'll be talking about Jewish identity, both in terms of the Ethiopian Jewry and then in terms of conversion. We'll be looking at the way that the Jewish law looks at non-Orthodox Jews in some issues, like, for example, inviting them for a meal on Shabbat, even if they're going to travel, as well as the way the shul may have changed in terms of how we utilize the shul for different purposes. Through the prism of one very famous discussion about bringing seeing eye dogs into shul. You might think, of course, someone who's blind needs a seeing eye dog. What's the question? But a shul is not a place. A seeing eye dog into shul. Well, you might think, of course, he needs it, but it's a shul. So, and we'll see that in particular in the modern era. And I say modern era, I mean really 1900s and 2000s, and getting to today. There really has been a push, and so there will be a common theme that we'll see through the sources and through the topics, but we'll specifically be looking through the prism of responsa. So today we're going to talk about the bat mitzvah. Who celebrated bat mitzvah? I only have men here in front of me. Any ladies on the Zoom have a bat mitzvah celebration when they turn 12? I'm sorry, but very, very true. I would say very traditional. I'd also say for the boys here that having a bar mitzvah party is also not very traditional. And we'll see how that comes up and enters into the discussion of how to celebrate. So it all starts off, though, with the idea that we have to mention is that, when is the age of maturity? When is the age of obligation in Judaism? And that everyone says boys is 13, girls is 12. So where does that come from? So the Gemara in Nida is actually talking about it. And of course, the Gemara in Nida is talking about very often women and their menstrual cycles, and that's something that happens as girls mature. So within that context, in that discussion, so the Mishnah in Nida, source number 1, says that an 11-year-old girl, Bas Achas Esrei Shana V'Yom Echad Nidareha Nivdakim. If a girl turns 11, we investigate her vows to figure out whether she knows what she's talking about, because she's still a kid. When she turns 12 in a day, if she takes an oath, she makes a promise is a promise. She's reached the age of maturity. From the year 11 to 12, she's in an intermediate stage, right? She's turning into a mature Jewish adult, but she's not there yet. So if she says something, we investigate. So that's an idea. If your words matter and count, and you're held accountable, then would be something of that's the age of maturity. So this idea of girls being 12 years old is discussed later on that page. Well, how do we know that a girl is at 12? Because it says about women, right, with regard to the creation of woman, Vayiven Hashem et Hatzela. God took the rib from Adam, and he was Vayiven. He built the woman, and he brought her to the man. This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be, granted woman a greater understanding, bina, than that of men. The woman was Vayiven. The woman has bina, Yetera, has extra wisdom, extra insight, right? This is, the idea. Women are more intuitive, maybe women more emotional, however it wants to be understood. Again, it's not a law, except when it comes to the fact that girls at 12 reach their spiritual, intellectual maturity. It doesn't say anything about their physical fully maturity, doesn't say anything necessarily about their emotional maturity, but the rabbis were seeking sources to show that girls are Jewish adults first. So this is where we have the idea, girl is 12, girls before boys, and the Rush, Rabbeinu Asher, it isn't a responsive, but not a contemporary one, that you ask, where do we know that a boy of 13 one day subject to punishment for transgression, but less than that is not? Know that it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Right, he was asked about, how do you know the idea of 13 is bar mitzvah? Halacha l'Moshe miSinai. This was a discussion that the Jews had around Sinai. That's the way I understand halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Literally, it's a law for Moses at Sinai. And so if you had to create the picture as to what's going on, there's Moshe went up to Sinai, taught the commandments, went up, went down, it's the golden calf, and starts teaching Torah. And the Torah that's taught is recorded in our Torah scrolls in terms of what's biblical. But at the same time, some of the things that are biblical are oral, and they were discussed. And they don't have necessarily as much in the way of textual support. And this is one of those subjects. Sometimes they were more substantive. Like, for example, when we talk about certain laws of Sukkah and Eruvin about partitions, we call this the laws of mechitzos, of partitions, right? Some of that has real application in many areas of Jewish law. That was discussed at Sinai. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that when you build a sukkah, it has to be 40 inches high. It doesn't say that, but that was halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Similar things like what our tefillin look like, the way we write Hebrew letters. And I just read a fascinating article last week. We're used to the Hebrew letters that Talmud discusses, and historically we have the archaeological evidence. The way we write Hebrew today is not how they always wrote Hebrew. The Talmud says that there is what's called Ksav Ivri, Hebrew writing, which is what they used to use. I think they call it Paleo-Palestinian script or something, the old Palestinian script. And then there's Ksav Ashuri, Assyrian script. And the Jews adapted the Assyrian script after the first temple. And there's a whole discussion as to when the shift took place. On some level, if you found a Torah scroll that went back 2,500 years, it was not written the same way as ours. And there's a whole, when did this switch exactly take place? The Talmud discusses it, archaeological evidence has it. But, so there are certain things that were not concretized, but halacha l'Moshe miSinai are things that were discussed and were concretized. Boys 13, girls 12.
So do you assume, Rabbi, that the reason girls are 12 is the physical or the being?
So a lot of the discussion of the maturity of the age of girls being younger seems to be a kind of intellectual, spiritual. There's the idea of physical maturity. There's certain signs of maturity. It has to do with hair growth, beard, pubic hair, stuff of the like. But in terms of the girl being younger, it seems that it's a bina yetera. It's more intuitive, spiritual, intellectual, as a some type of stereotype on that level. But the fact that it was younger, we're looking for the fact that what can we attach that younger age to? So So that's what you have the idea. You have a bar and a bat mitzvah when you become obligated. Now, the idea of celebrating this, right? In general, we have an idea, and Rabbi Shlomo Luria, he's writing in the 16th century, is going to talk about the celebration of it. We believe that it's better to be commanded. Gadol mitzuva v'yosef, better to be commanded. So Rabbi Shlomo Luria says, Sudas bar mitzvah shosim Ashkenazim. The Ashkenazim who have bar mitzvah meals, ein lacha suda mitzvah gadola mizo. There's no bigger mitzvah. You think he's a bar mitzvah party planner. The whole name, Suda bar mitzvah, Sudas mitzvah, being obligated, celebrating that it's in the same name. You're giving thanks to God that the young man is now obligated in commandments. The Gemara we just referenced, that it's better to be commanded. And the father has raised him until this point. To now that not only is he a Jew, but now he's an obligated Jew. And this is the idea that there is a blessing that is recited when someone becomes bar mitzvah. Baruch shepitarani me'ana shoshel zeh. Right, it's in the Siddur. Not everyone says it. It's a whole discussion of whether it's a full blessing or half a blessing. The idea that when they turn, when the children reach the age of Jewish maturity, we're no longer responsible for their sins. And so that's because they're obligated themselves. Okay, so there is an idea of celebrating a bar mitzvah. Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad moves this forward into the realm of girls. Also, the daughter, on the day she enters an obligation, even though they're not accustomed to hold the Seudah for her, nevertheless, she should be joyous on that day and dress in Shabbos clothes. If she has access to, she should wear a new garment and say the bracha of Shechiyanu and attend its recitation over entry into the yoke of mitzvot. Right, being commanded is the same. The idea of commandedness applies to men, women, boys, and girls equally. The level of obligation, the number of obligations is different, but it should be the same. Kaf HaChaim, also writing, from a Sephardic perspective, a little bit later than Rabbi Yosef Chaim, but I'd still call him early 1900s. It's good for the bar mitzvah to wear a new garment or to eat a new fruit on that day. Remember, the bar mitzvah, to say Shechianu. And also a girl should do this, entering her 13th year, to recite the bracha of Shechianu over a new garment or fruit, even though we don't make a Seudah for Sorot to Ben Ishchad, right? So the idea of celebrating the arrival to the yoke of mitzvos is something that has precedent. Certainly for bar mitzvah, the Rabbi Shlomo Luria speaks positively of it. A couple hundred years later, Rabbi Yosef Chaim speaks positively of it. But now let's pivot into the modern bat mitzvah. So there's an article, lots of different articles. The modern day contemporary idea of a bat mitzvah girl, as we know it, primarily, certainly on the American scene, but really what launched it as a kind of rite of passage for girls was Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. Mordechai Kaplan, who was a 1900s rabbi, 20th century, first half of the 20th century, born in the 1880s, lived a very long life. Started off as an Orthodox rabbi at very well-known congregations such as Kielach Jeshua and KJ on the Upper East Side, founding rabbi of the Jewish Center on the Upper West Side, then pivoted into JTS, which was at that time when he was there, pivoting to become more conservative. In the early days of JTS, it very much was aligned in a more traditional fashion. There was no conservative movement the way we know it 100 years ago. And then further pivoted to founding Reconstructionist Judaism, the idea of Judaism as a civilization, which was the title of his most famous book, in the idea that we maintain the rituals and the traditions, not because of the religious significance or necessarily because of commandedness, but because of how it makes us better people committed to these Mosaic Jewish ideals. Oversimplification, but that's who he was. So clearly in tune with the zeitgeist of the times, because the times are where we put our imprint on the times through Jewish values. So on Saturday morning, source 6, March 18th, 1922, 12-year-old Judith Kaplan, the daughter of Rabbi Mordechai M. Kaplan, stepped forward and stood just below the beam at her father's synagogue, Society for the Advancement of Judaism in New York City, right? He had already moved away from the Jewish Center. He was already blazing a non-Orthodox path. With the Torah scroll covered but in sight, Judith recited the preliminary blessing, read a portion of the Torah in Hebrew and English from her personal chumash, and then intoned the closing blessing. There's a lot to unpack here. The fact that she's not reading from the Torah, she's not reading for the congregation, she's doing something that no one had done in America before, and it's being celebrated in the synagogue in a very public way. At the same time, to me, what stood out the way this description, the Torah scroll covered but in sight. Right? They didn't even want this to be part of the Torah service. It's the same way we cover the Torah in between aliyot. So definitely huge from a Jewish sociological historical perspective. At the same time, you can see that he's not. The 1920s was still a much more traditional time, even for the more non-Orthodox expressions of Judaism.
Be interesting to know when exactly she did it, like before the Torah reading.
It seems like it was during the Torah reading, during the Torah service. They gave her a role, an independent role. She said Birchos HaTorah, and it seems like she said the bracha before an aliyah, which is the standard Birchos HaTorah that everyone recites in the morning, and then she said the bracha after. Now, some of you may be thinking, and it's not the topic of our conversation, but how that go forward 100 years to 2022, and in some Orthodox settings, they have what's called the Women's Tefillah group, which was became popular originated in Orthodox synagogues in the 70s, kind of reached a zenith in the early 90s, and is still found in some communities today, but very different. In some levels, it has a lot of the same ideas because it's not a full service. But they try to ritualize it more. On some levels, what Judith Kaplan was doing was she read from the Chumash, big deal. However, that wasn't really where it was coming from. Mordechai Kaplan was not someone who hung on to trying to remain within the traditional camp, but it definitely was a planting a flag.
It was new for the time.
Correct, but the idea of let's celebrate the bat mitzvah as a bat mitzvah in the synagogue with a potentially ritual role for the girl was now out there. And how do you respond? So, on the American scene, we're going to look at Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who influenced the way American Jewry approached halacha. He began to discuss this. And in particular, you have to remember, the question, and we'll see it inside, is really starting off about bat mitzvahs in synagogues during services. And it's going to touch upon the idea of what can take place in a synagogue and what can't. And for many of us, that's no longer as much of an issue because we see all sorts of things in synagogues. We have sometimes they show film, they have concerts in synagogues. These are things that 100 years ago, 150 years ago, were not part and parcel of the typical synagogue. A synagogue was for davening, and that was it. And within the laws of the synagogue, there's built into this idea of what's called a tanai, that you can stipulate that the synagogue can be used for other activities at the same time. And this tanai has kind of become what more of us are used to, because the tanai, without a tanai, remember the synagogues, when they talk about can you have kiddush in the shul, they weren't talking about kiddush in the social hall. They were talking about kiddush in the shul. Shuls didn't have social halls. The idea of a shul with bigger space was really not part of the Orthodox tradition until it became expanded upon it. It's not a bad thing. The same way sermons in the vernacular were originally reformed, and now sermons in a vernacular are universal. Maybe some people would rather they not take place, but the idea of the reason why is because the rabbi only gave a drasha twice a year. So the idea of a sermon every Shabbos was something new. So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is going to start addressing the bat mitzvah from that perspective, and you see source number 7, 1957. So, 1956. So he says, they want to make a celebration, an order, a service. Don't make it in the shul, even at night when it's not during davening. He says you shouldn't do optional things, even al tanai. Right, so Rabbi Moshe Feinstein recognizes that there is a tanai, but that tanai really is more circumscribed to more necessary things. And then he says, who can read that word? Ceremonia, the ceremony. Tekes is there in the Hebrew translation. Shabbos mitzvah, vadai rak divrei rishus, the hevel bi'alma. It's optional and maybe even frivolous. Ve'en shum makom lahatis of beis hakneses shouldn't be in the shul. Kol sheken b'zeh shamakar may have reformer, conservative, especially if it's to emulate the reformer conservative, right? He knows about Judith Kaplan's bat mitzvah in 1922. V'rakim rotav lasos eza simcha b'veiso rasha. You can make it at home. Alenza shum inyan usmat lachshiv ze davar mitzvah sudas mitzvah. It's not a sudas mitzvah. right? Remember with the Maharshal called the Bar Mitzvah Suda a Sudas Mitzvah. He's saying that Bas Mitzvah is not, right? He says, Rak Simcha Shel Yom Huledes B'Yam, it's a birthday. But then, V'Ayishir Chayli Ayis Mivatu in a Senagam Seder HaBar Mitzvah Shel Abanim Shekhi Yadu Olo V'Zeh Shumi Yishal Karva L'Torah Mitzvah. He says, I'd get rid of the Bar Mitzvah Suda. Right? He's not thinking about the Maharshal, it's a Sudas Mitzvah. He's saying the Bar Mitzvah parties, meals that they're having in 1956 are also frivolous. Right? It doesn't do anything for the Bar Mitzvah, doesn't do anything for the family. Aflo L'Shah Achas. Not even for 1 minute. It means people drive on Shabbos. Other things. So it's kind of like the story they tell about the family that has the bar mitzvah, and as part of the ceremony they present to the bar mitzvah boy the great grandfather's Kiddush cup, so he'll be the next one to pass it to the next generation. So on a weekday morning, and the bar mitzvah ceremony ends, everyone goes home. They can't find the Kiddush cup. And they're looking. A couple of days go by, they can't find it. They call the shul, they call the executive director. Finally, they call the rabbi, thinking, maybe he put it in his office or something. The rabbi's like, I put it in the kid's tefillin bag. The kid's not using his tefillin bag. Right? I always think about that in the summer because when some schools send around people, accidentally leave their tefillin in school. Of course, we live in an affluent age. People have their school tefillin and their home tefillin. I have to, but in any event. No, but Rabbi Feinstein is recognizing what's a bar mitzvah suda going to do if it's not leading to more mitzvah, right? The expression, it was more bar than mitzvah. So he says, I'll call anything that's established, mitzvah kasha levatel, but if it has a mitzvah element, you can't really get rid of it. He doesn't want to have any type of, unless there's a religious sentiment attached to it, you shouldn't have it. And certainly not in shul, and certainly not anytime, even if they're not Talmud. So that's Rabbi Moshe in 1956. Right. So then someone asked Rabbi Feinstein based on this, well, what about the Maharshal? What about the idea that there is a Sudas mitzvah, right? So we're saying, Madua a mitzvah b'Sudas bas mitzvah, right? He says, "Anachon the fiyanistam shum the ein nikar chaluk bas lamase b'masheneses gedol yosem mikat nusa." V'lodami leben shenikar tuva. He says, he says when girls become obligated in mitzvahs, it's not as recognizable. Because when boys become, they count in a zimun, they count in a minyan, they wear tefillin. And he says that even though we now know she's obligated in mitzvos, it's shalonike lamasa enos nesuda v'simcha afshe be'etzem yesh be'zeh osa simcha mamish. So he's kind of hedging it. He's saying there is that same simcha, but it's not as recognizable, so it doesn't have the same level of sudas mitzvah. So it's kind of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is saying, you got me, but I can still explain that it's not a Sudas mitzvah.
Was there a time lag between these two chuvas?
Yeah, well, obviously, someone read it. This shuv was written after the first shuv.
Well, right.
Yeah, it's not a big time.
Was it a couple of weeks or was it a couple of years?
Unclear. I have to go double check. I think we're talking months, if I recall correctly, because by the next time the shuv has about so this is 1959, and I mentioned that there's not that much new here. Other than he's talking about kind of the practical implementation of this, is like they're happening in shuls, Rabbi. What do we do? So he's talking about chagigas bas mitzvah beis hakneses, beis sivan tashin yotes. All right, so this is now, when this is now in 1959, and I mentioned this also. It's kind of interesting because when is it? Who's he writing to? Harav Meir Kahana. Rav Howard Beach, New York, right? Yes, it's that Meir Kahana, who was a pulpit rabbi at that time. And so he's writing to Meir Kahana. And he says, what about the bat mitzvah? Ein b'zeh inyan sudas mitzvah, right? He says it's just a birthday party, as we've seen before. And he says you shouldn't do it in the shul, even if it was al tanai. That's what we saw. Avalasus kiddush v'eis hakneses, shnogim b'rav batei knesses, d'medizinu zulasus b'chosim chashish l'adam. He says they're having a kiddush in shul afterwards. You want to make a bat mitzvah kiddush, and you want to say some words of Torah in honor of the simcha, right? This is okay. Avolo tomar al habima el etzah hashulchan. Shosin Akidasham, it shouldn't be kind of a part of the shul, it should be afterwards with Davar Bas Mitzvah, Shekvar Nikbes, let's say it's already there, Myochasav Toroska, Bofashli Zilusa, Kamshli Machlokes Lashana, Shebasas Kiddush, Yer Lashana. He says, look, if they have it already done, if you can change it, do it. But if you're not going to be able to do it without there being a Machlokes, then Yashali Yosef is a Machlokes, right? Leave it the way it is. You should just make it a regular kiddush and not a kiddush with a speech beforehand. And he says, so now he's writing back to Rabbi Kahana said, but what about the To'eles? What about the, you say that it's helpful for the shul? He goes back to what he said before. It's not really going to help. People are going to drive to shul. And then even with the boys, the bar mitzvahs don't work. And so he doesn't really, he in his perception, the way he sees it on the American scene, it's not helpful. But you see that he does introduce and advises Rabbi Kahana that, if it's happening a certain way, to do it differently and to cause machlokes is also not worth it. So you could say that, on some level, he's still opposed, very opposed based on his guidelines and what he sees in the American scene, but he's recognizing as rabbis are telling him what's happening, he's a little less right. Now, that's the American scene, and that's the American scene, in the 50s, right? And you have others, who tackle it, in a similar fashion. Rabbi Feinstein was kind of the preeminent posek to address these types of issues at the time, and that kind of sets the tone. And I would say in the last 60 years, we've seen a little bit of it's become more and more common. It's become harder and harder to not have, and they are celebrated, and they're celebrated, in all sorts of different fashions. And in many places, we'll have bat mitzvahs, they'll have bat mitzvah parties, they'll have mitzvah dinners, right? The ritual idea, really, I would say the consensus is not to change the rituals of the bat mitzvah, certainly on the mainstream American Orthodox scene, but there's this kind of an acceptance that the bat mitzvah is there, right? Day schools have bar mitzvah calendars and bat mitzvah calendars. It's known that it's going to happen. What about the Israeli scene? So it's interesting, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, source 10, it certainly seems that there's a mitzvah to hold a suda and a celebration for bat mitzvah. He says straight up, it's a suda, it's a bat mitzvah, it's a simcha. Here too, a girl becomes obligated, all the mitzvahs which a woman is obligated become one who is commanded and does, right? Mitzvah v'osa. It's good to make it a festive celebration. There's also a mitzvah. He does not have the reticence. Remember, Rabbi Feinstein said there is some simcha, but it's not recognizable simcha. And it could be said that the Israeli scene is very different, right? The Israeli scene doesn't have conservative and reform streams the same way. Certainly not in its early days, and certainly not even, even the contemporary world. Israelis primarily associate with tradition, even if there are, pockets of non-Orthodox Judaism. He's talking in the 70s and 80s. And so you have, certainly, and remember, we saw before that Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, a Sephardi, also saw the simcha. So it's not surprising that Rav Ovadia Yosef will carry that forward. He says it without hesitation. So then another major reaction to this was with Rabbi Chil Yaakov Weinberg, the Sridei Eish. And the Sridei Eish tackles this from a couple of different directions. He is known for being, more in what we today call the modern Orthodox camp. He was from the German, Persian, Torah im Derech Eretz, modern Orthodox tradition of the rabbis there. The Hildesheimer Seminary, as it was called, the Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, Rabbi Israel Hildesheimer, and the Sridei Eish was the last senior rabbi there before the Holocaust. He survived the Holocaust, ended up in Montreux in Switzerland. And was asked a lot of questions. And he wasn't the leader of a very active Orthodox community that these issues had to be so practical for him. He didn't have, for example, and we've raised before his discussion about boys and girls singing together in religious settings, right? That's the famous Kol Isha discussion. And it was at the Yeshurun youth group they asked him that question. It was not his local chapter. It was in general. So he's a very good sounding board of these halachic issues. He's not coming with any type of ideological agenda that sometimes people, in the 2000s, in the 21st century, you have certain a more ideological driven agendas. So he's often a good litmus test of what some of the halachic issues are if you don't have to worry about some of the ideological issues on the side. Sometimes. And especially as we'll see, he knows Rabbi Feinstein's discussions, and so he's writing in and he passed away in the 1967 or 68. So I think this is true from the early 1960s or 1960. So let's talk about Imutalachgo Chagigas Bas Mitzvah, source 11. Some people want to say this is a non-Jewish practice because he talks about the idea of what's called confirmation shel ha'akum hu l'shem avodah zarah. Right? Christian, Catholics have confirmation. So if it's about idolatry, if the idea of a confirmation is a idolatrous religious practice, then we couldn't have anything like that.
Doesn't that apply equally to bar mitzvah?
Yes.
Yeah.
If he's bar mitzvah, right? If they make a confirmation for their boys and their girls, we should also have it if it's for avodah zarah. It's not an idolatrous milestone. It's the celebration of a certain point in growing up. They don't do this to be Christian. He says he's not looking at the reform bat mitzvah ceremony as something religious. It's coming of age, right? Sweet 16, quinceanera, right? You have different cultural recognition and celebrations of milestones. So he says, he takes off, this is not Jewish, it's not idolatrous, we can check that off. Some of those who have started instituting bas mitzvah, they want to reinforce for the girl that it's about she should love Judaism. You want to increase within her a recognition she's part of the holy Jewish nation. We don't care about confirmations. They do theirs and we do ours. They bow to in their churches. People are doing this so that they can instill more religious pride. That's wonderful. But he says some argue that this is problematic. It was never done before. Right? This was never done before. He says this is not a claim. In previous generations, we didn't have to worry about the education of the girls. The Jews were more traditional. Right? The Jewish communal life was infused with reyach u'ruach hayadus, the smell and the atmosphere, the spirit of Judaism. It was basically no effort to absorb it. They basically nursed it from their mother's milk. Things have changed. The influence of the street completely uproots the Jewish influence. Girls who are going to school are going to Catholic schools or secular schools. They're not getting Jewish reinforcement there. We have to put real effort into educating the girls. It's very painful. In general education, in the secular educational systems, language and literature and science are taught to boys and girls. In the religion, the Jewish education for girls is lacking. It doesn't have a deeper study of Tanakh, of the teachings of our sages, the laws of the practical mitzvos. La'ashrenu amdu gedola Yisrael b'dor hakodem ala kalkala hazosi timosa shel Torah v'chizuk daltei ba'ad benos Yisrael. Thankfully, in the previous generation, right, he's talking about the Beis Yaakov movement. They had hakamat reshet gedola u'makifa shel Beis Yaakov. It was amazing. They have Beis Yaakov schools to start addressing this. So he's introducing that the idea that this is something new is also not enough of a reason not to have it, because if the bat mitzvah is there to educate and inspire, that's something that's sorely needed. And they never used to teach the girls anything Jewish, and now they do. So that's also, and we know that for the Beis Yaakov movement, there was also opposition to that. So he says, yeah, if a bat mitzvah is this type of level of celebration, it becomes essential. I mentioned that the Swedish was very sensitive to the educational experience of Jews outside of the normal realms of tradition. I often mention that when there is a tradition of saying Kiddush and Shul on Friday night. The Code of Jewish Law, we talked about this in Shul. The Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't have it. But they had it. Why they have it? Because people used to sleep in the shul and they eat their meal in the shul. So they have it there. But now we don't have that, but the custom still remains. So, but the Shulchan Aruch actually says better not to have the custom. In some places don't do it. Here in our shul, we don't do it on Friday night. We use the COVID break from not having it to stop having it. And that's that is a halachic approach based on the fact it's not necessary. So Rabbi Chil Yaakov Weinberg was asked by synagogues in Europe after the Holocaust. They've been destroyed. Now they're being rebuilt. Should we say Kiddush on Friday night? The custom was stopped. Should we reinstitute it? Shulchan Aruch says no. He says you should do it. And he said you should do it because there are people in Shul who aren't making Kiddush at home Friday night. And Judaism is very tenuous, especially, he says, after the Holocaust. And communities have been destroyed and families have been uprooted and Jewish life has been completely turned upside down. You don't know who's going to be in shul Friday night, and for them it becomes necessary. Now, that works for him. I don't think that it's as necessary in a contemporary American synagogue the same way. But you see that he's sensitive to the educational, spiritual, the Jewish enrichment that becomes necessary, and you do it even though you don't have to do it. And I think you can apply something similar to his approach here so far with bat mitzvah. Let's continue. Third paragraph on the third page. So even though I lean to permit it, right? I agree with Rabbi Feinstein. He says it shouldn't be a congregational ritual setting, or even a congregational setting not during the shul. It should be in the social hall or in a house. He stands up for the rabbis. You can only have it if the rabbi gets to give a speech. I like that. And this rabbi should give a speech encouraging her to keep Torah and mitzvos, right? Things that are between her and God, like kashrus and Shabbos, and to educate her children, and to encourage v'chovas ha'idud v'hachizuk lebal b'limud Torah v'shmiras ha'mitzvos. She should encourage her future husband to study Torah. She should look for a Talmud Chacham and one who fears heaven. Right? You should start reminding her that now she's entering the shidduch stage of her life once you become bat mitzvah. All right, so that is so he's not saying make it to the same level of bar mitzvah, but he says that there's more reason to elevate it, similar to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is taking the Sephardic tradition of celebrating the achievement of the age of mitzvos. He is saying we live in times that you have to encourage girls, and if the bas mitzvah is the vehicle for doing so, do it, as long as it doesn't go against the traditions of the synagogue. He says, look, I've laid out the issues, the pros and the cons, but it really depends on what people want out of this. Do they want this for valid reasons, or are they just doing this to be different? But I understand that those who are machmir, that they're not necessarily paying attention to the religious motivations of and not always to the halachic deliberations. Some people just judge this emotionally. right? Some people say it wasn't done, don't do it. The reformers did it, don't do it. I understand that. The Jewish heart that's connected to tradition trembles to make changes. You have to remember what the Rambam said, that everything has to be mipnei darkei shalom. Right? It's going to be different in each situation. And those who permit this are doing this out of genuine concern for the future religious state of the daughters of Israel. They're really worried about ensuring that they are able to have this spiritual attachment as they reach the age of mitzvahs. And then he's writing back to the rabbi who wrote him. The community wants it. You should not oppose them, but you should try and ensure that this is for the right purposes, for religious strength. So that's this Sudeish. It's just a voice which I think resonates and has resonated, and it shouldn't be viewed as conflicting with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. It's complementing Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was addressing specific situations at that time, and the communities coalesced around these different situations. Wanted to throw in two postscripts. One, Rabbi Yitzchak Nisim, one of the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. So he's writing in 1964. This is a translation about a very practical situation, and he's Sephardic, so we are recognizing that he's inclined to celebrate about mitzvah more, like we saw before. Your question was whether your daughter will soon reach the age of the commandments, permitted to go to the Torah and read the Haftorah. And right, so he's being asked really about someone who wants his daughter to have like a bar mitzvah, as a bas mitzvah. And you nuance your question by the fact that only daughters were born to you. You have a strong desire that the ones who come out of your loins should go up to the Torah, right? The guy only had girls. He wanted a bar mitzvah in the family. So he wanted the daughter to have the bar mitzvah. Tzlachot. Yes. So he wrote, it's good and proper to have a celebration for the bar mitzvah in the same way that is done for bar mitzvah. To my family, friends, and acquaintances have them participate in the celebration. At this occasion, the bar mitzvah girl should recite the Shechianu blessing. And if she is learning, she should say words relating to the day, read the song of Devorah, the first two verses of Chana's prayer. Right? He's offering a ritual path to celebrating it. Father, the girl should recite the blessing of exemption. He's saying, oh, you can say Baruch Shep Torani, and you can bless her, Achosenu at Heyela Alfeiru Vava, give her a specifically feminine blessing, right? That's what the children of Lot said to Rivka, right? That's the Bedekin blessing that we're familiar with, right? And she should, of course, go before into synagogue to pray, but not to go to the Torah. She should daven, right? She's a bar mitzvah, but she doesn't go up to the Torah. It's an explicit halacha that a woman does not read from the Torah in public, and we do not change the laws based on the feelings of people. It would be good to pray to God that your daughter is married to marry men who are observant, and your sons-in-law are like your son. So if they marry the right people, you'll have sons. So their children will go up to the Torah, you'll rejoice in them, and the spirit from us content with great satisfaction. So just an interesting responsum that it, captures a lot of what we've seen, recognizing that there are some more expansive celebratory components of a girl reaching the age of mitzvahs, some celebratory components of just the fact that she reaches that age, while there's hesitation that we're not going to change halacha because of it. We're not going to do it the same way as we do it with the boys. No, absolutely, it's all the same. Torah and Haftorah, he says you can't do that. Torah and Haftorah are linked together. There have been those who have had like a gathering together and let the girl lay in the Haftorah on a Tuesday morning and to show that she learned something. There are those who do that to try and thread the needle of their desire for more ritual, but you can't do that in shul. You can't do that in a regular minyan. So last but not least, I thought it'd be interesting to see in our community, Rabbanit Esti Rosenberg. Esti Rosenberg is the daughter of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. She's the head of the Migdal Oz yeshiva for women that's connected with Har Etzion, and so she talked about what her bar mitzvah was like. All right, so some of us are very fond and attached to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and his approach to halacha in religious Zionism and modern Orthodoxy. So what did Esti do? In honor of my bar mitzvah, I made a siyum on Seder Mo, and said they celebrated for me exactly as for my brothers. This is something that in my time was not done. There was not a religious demand from daughters. My parents chose that I should say a drasha. There should be invitations, a photographer, and catering. This was a meaningful event. The owner of the catering business said to us he had never cooked for a bar mitzvah, only for bar mitzvah. This is in Israel. They invited many people. Among them, I remember also Nechama Leibowitz. Today, when girls come here to Migdal Oz for Bat Mitzvah Day program, I ask how they mark it. Many tell me they make a siyum or tractate or Tanakh, a tractate or Tanakh or Sefer Achinuch. The world has changed, and this moves me. So she had a party, but she had to study Torah, and she feels that it's the Torah, right? That is helpful, and I think in many ways bar mitzvah too. People think, I have, our primary Balkore and bar mitzvah teacher right in front of me, Hirsch. Laning is key. At the same time, you want it to be the love of laning, the love of learning, and that's what is trying to be expressed. And, there was a time, and I think, what we saw from Rabbi Weinberg in the Svidei Eish, there was a time it wasn't so needed to complement or amplify these aspects of religious upbringing. Now we should, and I think that for those who say those who say, oh, you shouldn't have a bas mitzvah, right? For some of the same reason you shouldn't have a bas mitzvah, you shouldn't have a bar mitzvah. I mean that was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's opposition. The ceremonialization and celebration has to be more mitzvah than bar. Wishing Mazel Tov to all who have had. For those who missed out, it's still never too late to celebrate a Torah achievement, and that can be your new bar or bas mitzvah. And please God, we will continue next week.
That's really interesting. The real interesting thing is